Hello and welcome to the Whispering Worlds channel. You're invited to embark on a journey of love, betrayal, and redemption in this gripping tale of a family on the brink. Meet Evelyn and Michael, a couple whose lives are torn apart by ambition, suspicion, and broken promises. When a high-stakes business trip to Paris sparks doubt and unravels trust, their marriage faces its ultimate test. Will you sympathize with Evelyn's ambitions, Michael's pain, or the innocent laughter of their children caught in the crossfire? Are they two people finding their way back to love, or simply delaying the inevitable? Dive in and discover the answer for yourself. The early morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of the suburban home, gilding the edges of the neatly arranged living room. It was a scene of routine perfection. Two backpacks slouched against the wall near the door, sneakers arranged in pairs on the mat, and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. Yet, the atmosphere carried an undercurrent of tension, an invisible thread that pulled at the seams of the family. "Mommy, can we open our gifts now?" 7-year-old Chloe asked, her eyes wide with excitement as she tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Not yet, sweetheart. After breakfast, okay?" Evelyn responded, brushing a strand of auburn hair out of her face and giving Chloe a quick smile. Her tone was warm, but there was an edge of distraction to it. Across the kitchen island, her husband, Michael, stood stirring a cup of coffee. His expression was unreadable, though his movements were precise. Too precise, Evelyn thought. They had shared a dozen breakfasts like this over the years, but this one felt different. "You're leaving tonight?" Michael asked, not looking up from his cup. Evelyn hesitated, glancing down at her itinerary on the counter. "Yes, the flight's at 8 p.m. I'll be back by Friday evening. It's only a few days." Michael nodded slowly, but the silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn knew what he was thinking, though neither of them said it out loud. She had been promoted 3 months ago to a senior marketing role at her firm, and with the promotion came frequent trips. This particular trip, to Paris no less, had stirred something deeper in their conversations. A silent rift growing between them. "Daddy, will you read us the new bedtime story tonight?" Jamie, the other half of their twin duo, chimed in. Michael's face softened as he turned to his son. "Of course, buddy. You can pick whichever one you like." Evelyn watched the exchange, her chest tightening. Michael was a doting father, patient and present in ways she envied. Yet, somewhere along the way, their marriage had become more about co-parenting than partnership. The love they once shared seemed buried under layers of daily obligations and unspoken frustrations. By evening, Evelyn was packed and ready to leave. Her black carry-on suitcase sat by the door alongside a sleek leather tote filled with work documents. She bent down to kiss her children goodbye, savoring the feel of their small arms around her neck. "Be good for Daddy, okay?" she said, smoothing Jamie's hair. "We will. Bring us back something cool from Paris," Chloe replied, her grin missing a front tooth. Michael stood by the doorway, his arms crossed. "Safe travels," he said simply. Evelyn nodded, searching his face for a hint of warmth, but his expression was distant. It stung more than she wanted to admit. "Thanks. I'll call when I land." She turned and walked out, the click of her heels on the driveway echoing louder than it should have. As she drove to the airport, a pang of guilt settled in her chest. She knew Michael was struggling with her new role and its demands, but this trip was important. Landing the Paris deal would solidify her position and open doors she'd worked years to unlock. Was it so wrong to want that? The flight to Paris was uneventful, though Evelyn found it hard to relax. Her mind kept drifting back to the scene at home, to Michael's restrained tone and the children's cheerful waves. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the upcoming meetings. By the time they landed at Charles de Gaulle, the glow of the Eiffel Tower in the distance and the hum of the city's nightlife distracted her enough to feel a flicker of excitement. Her boss, Richard Sinclair, met her in the hotel lobby that evening. He was charismatic and sharp, a man who commanded attention without demanding it. They had worked together for years, but this was the first time they traveled as a team. "Evelyn, glad you made it," he greeted her with a warm handshake. "I've reserved a table for us at a nearby bistro. Let's go over tomorrow's pitch." She agreed, grateful for the chance to discuss the project. Over dinner, they reviewed strategies, adjusted slides, and shared laughs about cultural faux pas. Richard's easy demeanor put her at ease, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of confidence. When they parted ways that night, Evelyn returned to her hotel room, exhausted but optimistic. She stared out at the city lights from her window, letting the quiet hum of Paris soothe her nerves. Little did she know, the choices she was making now would ripple far beyond this trip, pulling her family into a storm she couldn't yet see. Back at home, Michael tucked the twins into bed, their giggles and chatter filling the house with a warmth he found bittersweet. After turning off their bedside lamps, he retreated to the living room, where he sat with his phone in hand, scrolling through the photos Evelyn had uploaded to her work account earlier that day. Among the candid shots of presentations and team dinners was a picture of her and Richard standing before the Eiffel Tower, their smiles bright and unguarded. Michael's thumb hovered over the screen. A pit formed in his stomach. He wanted to believe it was nothing, a professional moment, a friendly colleague. But something about the way Richard's hand rested lightly on Evelyn's shoulder stirred a suspicion he couldn't ignore. He set the phone down, leaning back on the couch. For the first time in years, the house felt too quiet. The morning in Paris dawned crisp and cool, the air filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and the distant hum of traffic. Evelyn stepped out of the hotel, adjusting her scarf against the breeze. Her meeting with the French partners was scheduled for mid-morning, leaving her a couple of hours to explore the streets. Paris had a way of enchanting even the most business-minded travelers, and Evelyn found herself momentarily mesmerized by the city's charm. She strolled along the Seine, taking in the intricate ironwork of the bridges and the vendors selling art prints and books. It felt surreal, a stark contrast to the suburban life she had left behind just days ago. As she wandered, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a text from Michael. "Hope your meetings go well. Chloe lost a tooth this morning and insists the tooth fairy will find her even if you're in Paris." Evelyn smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Tell her the tooth fairy has a global network," she typed back, hesitating before pressing send. She missed them already, but the heaviness in Michael's previous messages lingered in her mind. Their relationship was strained, and she knew it. But what was the solution? By the time she arrived at the office, Evelyn had pushed her doubts aside. The meeting with the French partners was a success, with both sides aligning on key deliverables and timelines. Richard, ever the charismatic leader, guided the discussions effortlessly, though Evelyn's contributions did not go unnoticed. She could see the respect in the partner's eyes as she presented her ideas with poise. "You were brilliant today," Richard said afterward as they walked out of the conference room. "The way you handled their objections, pure finesse." Evelyn blushed slightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. It's a team effort." "Nonsense," Richard replied with a grin. "That was all you. How about we celebrate tonight? There's a place near the Champs-Élysées that has the best escargot in the city. My treat." Evelyn hesitated. It was a tempting offer, and the thought of spending the evening immersed in Parisian culture was appealing. But she thought of Michael and the twins, of Chloe's tooth and Jamie's bedtime stories. "I appreciate it, but I think I'll just rest tonight," she said finally. "It's been a long day." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." That evening, Evelyn stayed in her room, opting for a quiet dinner brought up by room service. She video-called the twins, who excitedly told her about their day and showed off Chloe's newly toothless grin. Michael appeared briefly on the screen, his smile polite but distant. "How's Paris?" he asked. "Beautiful," Evelyn replied. "Busy, but beautiful." "How are things there?" "The usual. The kids keep me on my toes," he said, his tone clipped. "Anyway, it's getting late here. I'll let you get some rest." Evelyn watched as the screen went dark, the ache of separation settling deep in her chest. She missed him, missed the way things used to be, but the gap between them felt insurmountable. Meanwhile, back in the States, Michael's unease grew. He'd spent the day juggling work calls and parenting duties, but his mind kept drifting to Evelyn. Something about her recent behavior didn't sit right with him. That evening, after tucking the twins into bed, he found himself scrolling through her social media again. A new post caught his eye. A picture of Evelyn and Richard at the meeting earlier that day. They stood in front of a sprawling window with the Eiffel Tower visible in the background. Richard's arm rested lightly on the back of Evelyn's chair, his posture casual but possessive. Michael's jaw tightened. He told himself it was just a work photo, nothing more. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it took root quickly. He closed the app and stared at the ceiling, the quiet of the house pressing down on him like a weight. The next day in Paris, Evelyn found herself drawn into Richard's orbit once more. Their meetings continued to go well, and she couldn't deny that their professional rapport was effortless. Over coffee breaks and working lunches, they shared stories and laughter that felt easy, almost too easy. As they wrapped up their final meeting, Richard turned to her with a smile. "I have to say, Evelyn, you're one of the most impressive people I've worked with in a long time." Evelyn laughed lightly. "That's high praise coming from you." "It's the truth," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I hope you know that." For a moment, Evelyn felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. She pushed it away, focusing instead on the task at hand. There was too much at stake to let her emotions get in the way. Little did she know, Michael was feeling the same turmoil an ocean away, though his emotions were leading him down a much darker path. The quiet unraveling of their marriage had begun, and neither of them could stop the tide. Michael sat in his parents' cozy kitchen, the warm smell of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafting through the air. His mother busied herself at the counter, humming a tune as she prepared coffee, while his father read the morning paper in his usual spot by the window. The twins were in the living room, giggling over a cartoon on the TV. Despite the familiar comfort of his childhood home, Michael felt an unease that wouldn't leave him. "Something on your mind, son?" his father asked without looking up, his voice as steady and grounding as ever. Michael hesitated, unsure how much he wanted to share. "Just work stuff. It's been a lot lately." His father folded the paper and set it aside, his sharp eyes studying Michael. "It's not work, is it? This is about Evelyn." Michael sighed, leaning back in his chair. His father had always had a knack for cutting through the pretense. "She's on this trip to Paris. It's a big deal for her career, but, I don't know. Things have felt off between us for a while now." His mother chimed in, placing a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. "Off how? Did something happen?" Michael rubbed his temples. "It's hard to explain. We've been distant, and then I see her social media posts. Her boss is with her on this trip, and some of the pictures, I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking, but something doesn't feel right." His father leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "Marriage isn't always easy, Mike. There are highs and lows. But if you feel this way, you need to talk to her. Don't let your imagination fill in the blanks." Michael nodded, though he wasn't sure he could take that advice. The doubt gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch, growing louder with every passing moment. Meanwhile, in Paris, Evelyn sat in a quaint café near Montmartre, sipping a cappuccino as the afternoon sunlight painted golden streaks across the cobblestone streets. She had spent the morning wrapping up final presentations with the French partners, and now, for the first time on this trip, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she picked it up to see a message from her friend Olivia back home. "How's the city of love treating you? You better be bringing me back macarons." Evelyn smiled, typing a quick response. "It's gorgeous. You'd love it here. And yes, I've got macarons on my list." Before she could put her phone down, another message popped up, this time from Richard. "Great work today, Evelyn. Are you free tonight for a celebratory drink?" She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't unusual for colleagues to socialize after a successful project, but something about Richard's tone made her pause. Her mind flicked to Michael, to the quiet distance between them, and she felt a pang of guilt. After a moment, she typed back a polite decline and put the phone away. The rest of her afternoon was spent exploring the city, but the weight of her decisions lingered. The boundary between professional admiration and something more felt dangerously thin, and Evelyn was determined not to cross it. But could Richard see it the same way? That evening, Michael put the twins to bed early. Their giggles and hugs always brought him comfort, but tonight they weren't enough to dispel the storm of thoughts in his head. Once the house was quiet, he pulled out his laptop and began searching through Evelyn's social media feed. The images and captions were innocent enough: scenic views, snapshots of meals, and group photos with colleagues. Yet, every post featuring Richard made Michael's stomach twist. Unable to resist, he clicked on Richard's profile. The man was polished and confident, his posts filled with photos of luxurious trips and high-powered meetings. One recent post caught Michael's attention: a candid shot of Richard and Evelyn in Paris. The caption read, "Closing deals in the city of light with the best team in the business." Michael's chest tightened. His rational side told him this was nothing more than a professional post, but his emotions painted a darker picture. The way Richard stood so close to Evelyn, his easy smile, her laugh frozen in the image, it all felt too personal. He closed the laptop abruptly, running a hand through his hair. Was he losing trust in Evelyn? Or was this about his own insecurities? The questions haunted him as he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling until the early hours of the morning. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the hotel lobby, her suitcase in tow. Her time in Paris was over, and though she felt proud of her work, the trip had left her emotionally drained. Richard met her at the concierge desk, his usual charm intact. "Ready to head back home?" he asked, his voice light. "Absolutely," Evelyn replied with a tired smile. "I can't wait to see my kids." Richard chuckled. "Well, they're lucky to have a mom like you." Evelyn nodded, but the compliment didn't land the way he might have intended. The lines between personal and professional felt increasingly blurred, and Evelyn was desperate to get back to her family, to her reality. As they shared a cab to the airport, Evelyn caught Richard stealing a glance at her. She pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the city disappearing behind them. She was going home, but she knew things wouldn't be the same. Michael's growing distance, her own wavering confidence, and the subtle tension with Richard were threads that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed life. What she didn't realize was that the seeds of doubt she had tried so hard to ignore were already taking root on both sides of the Atlantic. Evelyn arrived home late Friday evening, the twins already fast asleep. The house was dark except for the dim glow of the kitchen light, where Michael sat nursing a glass of wine. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Hey," Evelyn said softly, setting her suitcase by the door. She was exhausted from the long flight but could sense the tension hanging in the air. "How were the kids?" "They're fine," Michael replied, his voice clipped. "Chloe wouldn't stop talking about her missing tooth. Jamie asked about you every night." Evelyn nodded, her chest tightening. She moved to the sink and poured herself a glass of water, her back to him. "I missed them too." "And how was Paris?" Michael asked, the question loaded with something heavier than curiosity. Evelyn hesitated, setting the glass down. "It was good. Productive. The meetings went well." "Productive," Michael repeated, leaning back in his chair. "That's one way to describe it." Evelyn turned to face him, her stomach knotting. "What's that supposed to mean?" Michael met her gaze, his eyes sharp. "I saw the photos, Evelyn. The ones with you and Richard." Evelyn's breath caught. "What about them? What about them?" Michael's voice rose slightly. "You're standing there with him in almost every picture, laughing like you're on a vacation instead of a business trip. His hand on your shoulder, the way he looks at you. I'm supposed to believe that's just professional?" Evelyn felt heat rising to her face, a mix of anger and guilt. "They are professional. Those photos mean nothing, Michael." "Do they?" he shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like there's more to it." "There isn't." Evelyn's voice cracked, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Richard is my boss. Yes, we work closely together, but that's it. You're reading into things that aren't there." Michael shook his head, his jaw tight. "Am I?" Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? Evelyn stared at him, her frustration boiling over. Why are you so quick to assume the worst of me? Have I ever given you a reason not to trust me? Michael stood, setting his glass down with a thud. It's not just about trust, Evelyn. It's about how distant you've been. How everything in our lives revolves around your job now. The late nights, the trips, the way you shut me out when I try to talk to you. I'm doing this for us. Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. For our family. Do you think I enjoy being away from the kids, missing bedtime stories and tooth fairy visits? I'm working my ass off to give us a better life. And all you can do is question my loyalty. Michael's face hardened. Maybe because it feels like you've already chosen what matters most to you, and it's not us. The words hit Evelyn like a slap. She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. The silence that followed was deafening. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The twins sat at the kitchen table, eating their cereal while Evelyn sipped her coffee. Michael was outside, tending to the yard, a ritual he often turned to when he needed to clear his head. Mommy, did you bring us gifts? Chloe asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. Evelyn forced a smile, retrieving 2 small packages from her bag. Of course I did. These are from Paris. The twins tore into the packages, squealing with delight at the miniature Eiffel Towers and colorful macarons. Their joy was a brief reprieve, but Evelyn's mind remained on her argument with Michael. She felt as though a chasm had opened between them, one she didn't know how to bridge. Later that day, Evelyn found Michael in the garage, fixing the twins' bikes. She stood in the doorway, unsure how to start. Michael, she began, her voice soft. Can we talk? He didn't look up. What's there to talk about? About us, she said, stepping closer. I know things have been hard lately, but I don't want us to keep drifting apart. Michael set down the wrench, his shoulders slumping. Do you even see it, Evelyn? How different things have become. It's like we're living 2 separate lives. Evelyn swallowed hard. I see it, and I hate it, but I don't know how to fix it. Michael finally met her eyes, the hurt in his expression unmistakable. Maybe we need to figure out if it's even fixable. The words hung between them, heavy and final. Evelyn felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time, she realized they might be standing at the edge of something they couldn't come back from. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in the living room, scrolling through her phone. Her finger hovered over Richard's contact. She thought about their conversations, his easy compliments, the way he made her feel seen. But she also thought about Michael, about the life they had built together and the pieces of it now scattered around them. She locked her phone and stared at the darkened screen, her reflection staring back. For all the certainty she had in her career, her personal life had never felt more uncertain. Michael sat in his parents' backyard, watching the twins chase each other across the lawn. The warm glow of the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the sound of their laughter should have been comforting. Instead, it only reminded him of how fragile their family felt. His mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Dinner's almost ready. The twins can eat out here if they want, she said, taking a seat next to him. Michael nodded but didn't respond, his thoughts miles away. You've been quiet all day, she observed, her tone gentle but probing. Still thinking about Evelyn? Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do, Mom. Things have been off between us for a while now, and I feel like I can't reach her, like she's already gone. His mother tilted her head, her eyes soft with understanding. Marriage goes through seasons, Michael. Some are harder than others. But you have to decide if you're willing to fight for it. Michael hesitated. What if she isn't? Then at least you'll know you tried. His mother replied, her voice firm. But don't let fear make that decision for you. The conversation lingered with Michael as he watched the twins race toward him, their faces flushed with excitement. Chloe jumped into his lap, her toothless grin lighting up her face. Daddy, can we have ice cream after dinner? She asked, her eyes wide with hope. Michael chuckled despite himself. We'll see, Munchkin. For a brief moment, He allowed himself to savor the simplicity of their joy, even as the weight of his worries pressed against the edges of his mind. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her office at home, going through emails and finalizing reports from the Paris trip. Her laptop screen glowed in the dimly lit room, and the quiet hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound. She couldn't focus, her thoughts drifting back to her argument with Michael. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from Richard. "Great work on the Paris deal. Let's discuss next steps tomorrow. Also, don't forget about the networking dinner next week. I'll need you there." Evelyn stared at the message, the words blurring in her mind. She knew Richard valued her professionally, but she couldn't ignore the subtle undertones that sometimes crept into his interactions with her. She hesitated, then typed a quick reply confirming her attendance at the dinner before setting the phone down with a sigh. Pushing back her chair, Evelyn walked to the living room. The house was quiet, the twins already asleep and Michael nowhere in sight. She found him on the back porch, staring into the night sky. "Hey!" she said softly, stepping outside. Michael didn't look at her, his voice flat. "Hey!" Evelyn sat down next to him, the cool night air brushing against her skin. "We need to talk." He nodded but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I know I've been distant," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been so focused on work, on proving myself, that I haven't been the partner you deserve." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Evelyn continued, "I want to fix this. I want us to be better, but I can't do it alone. I need you to tell me what you need, what we need to do to make this work." Michael turned to her then, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and pain. "I've been trying to tell you, Evelyn, but every time I do, it feels like you're not really listening. Like your job is the only thing that matters." "It's not," she said quickly, reaching for his hand. "You and the kids matter more than anything." "Then why does it feel like we're always second?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Why does it feel like you're already halfway out the door?" Evelyn felt tears welling in her eyes, but she held them back. "Because I've been scared," she admitted. "Scared that I'll fail, that I'll let you down, that I'm not enough." Michael stared at her, his expression softening slightly. "You've never been not enough, Evelyn. But you have to decide what you want. Because I can't keep doing this, wondering if I'm losing you." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Evelyn knew he was right. She had been running on autopilot for months, trying to juggle everything without realizing how much was slipping through the cracks. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to lose us." Michael didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute. "Then we need to draw some lines, Evelyn. For us, for the kids. Work can't keep coming first." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're right. I'll talk to Richard. I'll set boundaries." Michael searched her face for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but this isn't just about words, Evelyn. I need to see it." "I know," she said, her voice firm. "You will." As they sat in the quiet of the night, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The following week was a blur of school drop-offs, work meetings, and attempts at normalcy. Evelyn tried to show Michael she was serious about making changes. Logging off work earlier, spending more time with the kids, and initiating conversations with him about their future. For a moment, it seemed like they were finding their rhythm again. But life had a way of testing even the best intentions. On Thursday evening, Evelyn sat at the dining table, helping Jamie with his math homework while Chloe drew pictures of unicorns on her notepad. Michael was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The warm domesticity of the scene almost felt like a return to their old life. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Evelyn glanced at the screen and saw Richard's name flash across it. A sense of unease crept over her, but she pushed it aside and picked up the call. "Hello, Evelyn." Richard's voice was smooth and confident as always. "Just wanted to remind you about tonight's networking dinner. I hope you haven't forgotten." Evelyn froze. The dinner. She had completely forgotten. Her stomach twisted as she glanced at Michael in the kitchen. I don't think I can make it tonight, Richard. Something's come up. There was a pause on the other end. Evelyn, this dinner is important. The clients specifically asked if you'd be attending. It's a chance to solidify the relationship we've been building. Evelyn closed her eyes, torn between the promise she'd made to Michael and the weight of her professional responsibilities. Let me see what I can do, she said finally, hating the way the words tasted. I knew I could count on you, Richard replied, his tone triumphant. See you there. As the call ended, Evelyn's heart sank. She put the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. Who was that? Michael's voice broke the moment. He stood in the doorway, a spatula in hand, his eyes narrowing. Evelyn hesitated. Richard, there's a dinner tonight, a networking event. I forgot about it. Michael's jaw tightened. So you're going? I think I have to, she admitted, guilt washing over her. It's important. Michael's expression darkened. Right? Of course it's important. Michael, please, Evelyn said, standing up. This wasn't planned. I'll make it up to you, to the kids. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. That's what you always say, Evelyn. And yet here we are again. You made promises, and now you're breaking them. Evelyn reached for him, but he stepped back. I'll be back as soon as I can, she said softly, knowing her words were hollow. Michael turned and walked away, his silence louder than any argument. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city skyline. Evelyn arrived late, her nerves frayed. Richard greeted her at the entrance, his charismatic smile firmly in place. Glad you could make it, he said, placing a hand on her back as he guided her inside. Evelyn forced a smile, trying to focus on the clients rather than the weight of what she'd left behind at home. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and toasts. Richard, ever the smooth operator, effortlessly charmed everyone at the table. Evelyn played her part, but her heart wasn't in it. As the dinner wound down, Richard leaned in close. You were fantastic tonight, Evelyn. The clients were impressed. Thanks, she replied, her voice flat. Richard's smile faltered. Everything okay? Evelyn hesitated before nodding. Just tired. It's been a long day. Well, let me get you a cab, he offered, his concern tinged with something she couldn't quite place. I'll manage, she said quickly, grabbing her coat. Thanks, Richard. She left before he could say anything else, stepping out into the crisp night air. The ride home was quiet, the city lights blurring past the window as she tried to compose herself. She knew she'd crossed a line, not with Richard, but with Michael, and she wasn't sure how to undo the damage. When Evelyn walked into the house, the lights were off, and the quiet was deafening. She set her bag down and went to the twins' room. They were asleep, their soft breaths filling the space with a warmth that eased her guilt just slightly. She found Michael in the living room, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. The TV was on but muted, the glow illuminating his tired face. You're back, he said without looking at her. I am, she said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. Michael, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone. He finally turned to her, his eyes filled with disappointment. But you did, and you'll keep doing it, Evelyn, because that's who you are now. That's not fair, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. I'm trying, Michael. I really am. Are you? He asked, his voice cold. Because it feels like you're trying to juggle two lives, and we're the ones paying the price. The silence that followed was heavy, neither of them willing to speak the words hanging in the air. Evelyn wanted to tell him she could change, that she would prioritize their family. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she could. As Michael stood and left the room, Evelyn stayed behind, staring at the muted TV. The flicker of hope she had felt just days ago was gone, replaced by the sinking realization that they might already be too far apart to bridge the gap. The days following the networking dinner were marked by an uneasy truce in the house. Evelyn tried to engage with Michael, but his responses were curt, and the warmth that once characterized their relationship felt more like a distant memory. She spent her evenings reading to the twins, immersing herself in their bedtime stories, as if their laughter could drown out the growing silence between her and Michael. On a Friday morning, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open and her coffee growing cold beside her. She was reviewing emails when Chloe wandered in, her bedhead a wild halo around her sleepy face. "Mommy, are you staying home today?" she asked, climbing onto a chair beside her. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at her calendar. "I have to work for a bit, sweetie, but I'll be here after that. Maybe we can do something fun this evening." Chloe's face lit up. "Can we go to the park? Jamie wants to ride his bike there." "Of course," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. "We'll make a whole evening of it." As Chloe skipped off, Evelyn's phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen sent a ripple of dread through her. "Richard." She picked up the call, lowering her voice. "Hello, Evelyn," Richard began, his tone brisk. "We've hit a snag with the Paris account. There's been some pushback from their legal team, and we need to sort it out. Can you come into the office this afternoon?" Evelyn closed her eyes, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm supposed to be with my family today, Richard. Can't this wait until Monday?" "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent," Richard said. "This deal is pivotal for both of us." The unspoken weight of his words settled heavily on Evelyn. After a pause, she sighed. "I'll be there." Later that afternoon, Michael came home early from work, surprising Evelyn as she prepared to leave. "You're going somewhere?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. "There's an issue at work," Evelyn said, avoiding his gaze as she grabbed her bag. "I have to go in for a few hours." Michael's jaw tightened. "I thought you said you'd spend today with the kids." "I know," Evelyn replied, her voice soft. "This came up last minute. I'll be back in time to take them to the park." Michael laughed bitterly. "Sure you will." "Michael, please," she said, stepping closer to him. "This isn't easy for me either." "But you're still going, aren't you?" he shot back. "Because work always wins." Evelyn froze, guilt and anger warring within her. Without another word, she left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing in her ears. At the office, Evelyn immersed herself in the crisis, working alongside Richard to resolve the legal dispute. Hours slipped by unnoticed until her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Kids are asleep. Don't bother rushing home." The message was a punch to the gut. Evelyn looked up to find Richard watching her, concern etched on his face. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head, standing abruptly. "I need to go." Richard stood too, blocking her path. "Evelyn, wait. If this is about tonight, you need to know I value everything you've done for this team. You're the reason we've come this far." "Richard, I appreciate that," she said, her voice strained. "But I have a family at home, and I can't keep doing this." For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze searching hers. Then he nodded, stepping aside. "Take care, Evelyn." She left without looking back, her thoughts racing as she drove home. By the time she arrived, the house was dark and quiet. She found Michael in the living room, his expression unreadable as he sat on the couch. "You're late," he said, not looking at her. "I know," Evelyn replied, her voice breaking. "Michael, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Michael finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "You keep saying that, Evelyn, but nothing changes." "I'm trying," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose us." Michael's voice softened, but it was laced with resignation. "I don't think it's about what you want anymore. It's about what you're willing to give up." Evelyn stared at him, her heart breaking as she realized he was right. She had been chasing a balance that no longer seemed possible, and in the process, she had pushed her family further away. "I'll do better," she whispered. "I promise." Michael stood, his movements deliberate. "We'll see," he said simply before walking away. As the door to their bedroom closed, Evelyn sat alone in the dimly lit room, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The cracks in their marriage had grown wider, and she wasn't sure if they could ever be repaired. Evelyn stood at the edge of the playground, watching Chloe and Jamie race each other on their bikes. The early evening sun cast a golden glow over the park, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. But despite the idyllic setting, Evelyn felt the weight of Michael's absence. He had refused to join them, his silence over dinner a clear message. "Mommy, look at me," Jamie called, pedaling furiously down the path. Chloe trailed behind, giggling as her bike wobbled. "You're doing great," Evelyn shouted back, forcing a smile. Her heart ached, the joy of the moment overshadowed by the growing tension at home. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she hesitated before pulling it out. Another message from Richard. "Tomorrow's meeting with the Paris team is confirmed. Let's review the details in the morning." Evelyn clenched her jaw, the familiar frustration bubbling up. She had already told Richard she needed the weekend for her family. This relentless encroachment on her personal life was starting to feel intentional. "Mommy, push me on the swings." Chloe's voice pulled Evelyn back to the present. "Coming, sweetheart," she said, tucking her phone away. As she pushed Chloe, her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She needed to regain control of her life, but every attempt seemed to pull her further into chaos. Later that night, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of her laptop. A half-written email to Richard glowed on the screen, the cursor blinking impatiently. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she debated how to phrase her resignation. The thought of walking away from everything she had worked for was terrifying, but the cost of staying was becoming unbearable. The sound of footsteps broke her concentration. Michael entered the room, his expression guarded. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, avoiding her gaze. "Michael," Evelyn began, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" He didn't respond immediately, taking a long sip of water before finally looking at her. "What is there to talk about?" "About us," she said softly. "About how we fix this." Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his tone measured. "And I don't know if we can." Evelyn's heart sank. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "Evelyn, we've been trying to hold this together for months, but nothing's changing. I'm tired. The kids are starting to notice, and I don't want them growing up in a house full of resentment." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "Michael, please, I can do better. I'll set boundaries at work. I'll quit if I have to." Michael shook his head. "It's not just about the job. It's about trust. About knowing we're in this together. And right now, I don't feel that." Evelyn reached for his hand, her voice breaking. "I love you. I love our family. Isn't that worth fighting for?" Michael pulled away gently, his expression pained. "Sometimes love isn't enough." The words hung in the air like a dagger. Evelyn sat frozen, her mind racing for a way to salvage what was slipping through her fingers. But Michael turned and left the room, leaving her alone with the emptiness. The next day, Evelyn sat in her car outside Richard's office, staring at the building. She had intended to go inside, to attend the meeting and continue as if nothing had changed. But as she gripped the steering wheel, a wave of clarity washed over her. She couldn't keep living like this. The career she had fought so hard for had become a prison, and her relentless pursuit of success had cost her the most important thing in her life, her family. Evelyn picked up her phone and dialed Richard's number. "Evelyn," he answered, his tone brisk. "Are you on your way? The meeting's about to start." "No," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I'm not coming." There was a pause. "Excuse me?" "I'm done, Richard," Evelyn continued. "I'm resigning. Effective immediately." "Evelyn, let's not be hasty," Richard said, his voice shifting to a more conciliatory tone. "We can discuss this." "There's nothing to discuss," she interrupted. "This job has taken too much from me already. I can't do it anymore." Before he could respond, Evelyn ended the call. She sat back in her seat, the weight of her decision both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. That evening, Evelyn returned home to find Michael helping the twins with a puzzle. The sight of them together, their laughter filling the room, brought a lump to her throat. "Michael," she said, stepping into the room. He looked up, his expression cautious. "Hey, I quit my job," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Michael stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I am. I'm done making excuses. I just need to know if it's too late." Michael glanced at the twins, then back at her. "It's not going to be easy," he said finally. "But if you're willing to fight for this, so am I." Relief flooded Evelyn's chest as she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a perfect solution, and their problems wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in months, she felt like they were on the same side. The following weeks were a tentative dance between healing and reality. Evelyn's resignation from her job had brought immediate changes to her daily life, but the wounds in her relationship with Michael and the trust they were trying to rebuild required far more time. Evelyn spent her days rediscovering the rhythm of family life. She walked the twins to school in the mornings, took them to the park in the afternoons, and helped them with their homework in the evenings. Slowly, the children's initial confusion at her sudden availability shifted into joy. They clung to her more, as if afraid she might vanish again. One Friday evening, Evelyn was sitting on the living room floor, assembling a train set with Jamie, while Chloe painted pictures at the coffee table. Michael walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He paused, watching them with an expression that was equal parts surprise and relief. "It's nice seeing you like this," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up, her hands resting on the small plastic train. "It feels good to be here," she admitted. Michael sat down in the armchair, his gaze steady. "I wasn't sure if you meant it, you know, when you said you were done with work." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I meant it. I realized how much I was losing, how much I had already lost. And I don't want to go back to that." Michael nodded but didn't respond immediately. The quiet stretched between them, filled with the children's laughter. Then he said, "I'm glad, but we still have work to do." "I know," Evelyn replied, her voice soft. "And I'm ready." That weekend, Michael surprised Evelyn by suggesting they spend the day at the beach, a family tradition they had let slip in recent years. Evelyn packed sandwiches and snacks while Michael loaded the car with towels, buckets, and shovels. The twins buzzed with excitement, their chatter filling the air. The drive to the beach was filled with a mix of nostalgia and hope. Evelyn and Michael sat side by side in the front seat, exchanging small smiles as the kids sang along to the radio. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a sense of possibility. At the beach, the twins raced to the water, their laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. Evelyn spread out a blanket on the sand, while Michael helped Chloe build a sandcastle. She watched him, her heart aching with gratitude and regret. He had always been such a good father, even when their marriage had been strained. Later, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Evelyn and Michael sat together on the blanket, watching the twins chase seagulls along the shore. "I've missed this," Evelyn said softly. "All of it. Us." Michael glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Me too." Evelyn hesitated, then reached for his hand. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I want to make things right. Not just for the kids, but for us." Michael's fingers tightened around hers. "I want that too, but it's going to take time, Evelyn. We can't just pretend everything's fine." "I don't want to pretend," she said. "I want to rebuild." Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then let's start." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn and Michael took small but deliberate steps to reconnect. They set aside time for each other after the kids went to bed, talking about their day or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. Evelyn suggested couples therapy, and while Michael was hesitant at first, he eventually agreed. Their sessions were difficult but cathartic, forcing them to confront the unspoken resentments and fears that had festered over the years. Evelyn admitted her guilt over prioritizing work and her fear of inadequacy as a wife and mother. Michael confessed his feelings of abandonment and his struggle to trust her again. "It's not about proving yourself," their therapist said during one session. "It's about showing up consistently for each other and for your relationship." Evelyn took those words to heart, making an effort to be more present and transparent with Michael. She shared her hopes and fears, her struggles and triumphs, and slowly, the walls between them began to come down. One evening, as they sat on the porch after putting the kids to bed, Michael turned to Evelyn with a small smile. "You know, I wasn't sure we'd get here." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. "Where's here?" "This place where it feels like we're on the same team again," he said. "It's been a long time." Evelyn reached for his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. "I know, but I'm glad we're here." Michael squeezed her hand. "Me too." As the stars twinkled above them, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Their journey wasn't over, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in months, she believed they could navigate it together. The soft hum of morning filled the house as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. Evelyn flipped pancakes on the stovetop while the twins chattered excitedly at the table. Michael sipped his coffee nearby, the warmth of the moment wrapping around them like a familiar embrace. "Mommy, can we go to the zoo today?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Yeah, and see the lions," Jamie added, practically bouncing in his seat. Evelyn laughed, flipping the last pancake onto a plate. "Let's see what Daddy says." Michael smiled at her over his mug. "Sounds like a plan." The twins cheered, and Evelyn felt a flicker of pride. These small moments, shared laughter, the smell of pancakes, the brightness in her children's eyes, were what she had been missing. And now they were hers again. Later that day, Evelyn stood in the backyard, watching the kids play while Michael worked on the garden. The weight that had once pressed on her chest seemed lighter, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. The scars of their struggles were still there, but they had begun to heal. Michael straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, walking over to her. "Just reflecting," Evelyn said with a small smile. "On how far we've come." Michael nodded, glancing at the kids. "It's been a journey." Evelyn turned to face him, her expression serious. "Thank you for not giving up on us. I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," Michael admitted, "but it was worth it." She reached for his hand, her eyes meeting his. "I want to keep earning that. Every day." Michael squeezed her hand, his smile soft. "You already are." Months later, Evelyn found herself back in an office. Not as an employee, but as a consultant. She had taken on part-time projects that allowed her to work from home, balancing her professional ambitions with her commitment to her family. It wasn't the life she had imagined years ago, but it was one that fit the person she had become. One afternoon, she received a call from Olivia, her closest friend. They hadn't spoken much during the height of Evelyn's struggles, but now their conversations were frequent and grounding. "So," Olivia began, "how does it feel to have your life back?" Evelyn chuckled. "It's not perfect, but it's mine. And I've learned that's enough." They talked for a while, sharing stories and laughter. And when Evelyn hung up, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. That evening, Evelyn and Michael sat together on the porch, a habit they had developed during their journey back to each other. The night was quiet, the stars bright above them. "Do you think we'll ever stop working on this?" Evelyn asked, her head resting on Michael's shoulder. Michael shook his head, his voice warm. "No, but I think that's the point. Marriage isn't something you finish. It's something you keep building." Evelyn smiled, his words settling into her heart. They still had their challenges, but they faced them together now, as partners, as a family. As they sat in the embrace of the night, the future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn was ready for it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.